Hi, I'm John Hinrichs. Welcome to my world. We're making a little documentary today about my toy soldier collection and how it came to be and how it's gone on for me all the rest of my adult life. And I hope you'll enjoy it. As you're coming up the stairs, first thing you'll see is a pretty complete collection of every military dinky toy made. Most of these were made in the 1950s. Some, particularly these aircraft guns and truck are pre-World War I, and they belong to my father. Top of the stairs, you'll get the full impact of my, I guess you'd call it a madness. There are toy soldiers in vitrines lining every available square inch of my wall. There's about 2,000 somewhere in this apartment. My passion has been collecting and assembling lead soldiers to tell stories about my youth. I came to Canada as a very young boy from Scotland, from a large family. The aunts and uncles were never really quite sure, but they knew that every boy liked soldiers, and I got boxes of them. Then, as I discovered women, found that they were a bit more interesting to me than toys. And I was throwing them all out when my dad said, wait a minute, what are you doing? And I said, well, I can't have all these toys in my room. He said, well, I'll put them away for you, John, because, surprise, you may find one day that they're just as interesting to you as they are today. And he turned out to be right. I started collecting again when I was about 40, but this time around I began to collect in certain niche categories. Not military. By then I'd learned that there were not only cowboys and Indians, but there were fairy tale characters and Boy Scouts and Africans and Eskimos, and it just goes on forever. It was quite natural for me as I began to expand my collections to be interested in lead figurines that related to nature. In the first corner of my apartment, a collection of as many different alligators and crocodiles that I could find. And to this day, if I'm anywhere near a pond, I'm going to have a wet foot. Right now, I've just acquired a new baby snapping turtle from a friend, native Canadian species. He's growing by leaps and bounds, so in a couple of years he'll have to go back to nature. In my rather modest washroom, where I further my collection of all things pond life, salamanders, newts, and kimono dragons, intact salamander with no broken tail and no legs missing. Every little frog and toad that was ever made. Dancing girls with their boa constrictors. Various snake charmers. This is a little lady riding on a turtle, and you can undo the thread and pull her along. I'm going to talk about individual collections. This is a very interesting vignette that I created. This is Peter Pan and Wendy, the alligator. He's from Germany. Captain Hook and the Pirates. They're Johilco, Britain. This is a very complete set with the original box of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The Witch is very scarce. Then we move into Robin Hood, one of my favorite stories as a boy. The top shelf are all fairy tale characters by Seagal, which is the top brand, and they're all really extremely scarce. This is a great set. The little old lady can go do the shoe many children to know what to do. Humpty Dumpty, Jack and the Beanstalk, Dick Whittington, Jack Horner, Little Boy Blue, Old Mother Hubbard, Mary Had a Little Lamb. The bottom shelf is the Fairies Picnic, and it's all the little elves sitting on toadstools eating lunch from a big toadstool. 3 little pigs and the straw hut. Goldilocks and 3 bears with their porridge bowls. Flanking the fairy tales are 2 vitrines. The top shelf are all American figurines made by Manoil. Of acquired very cheaply because they were in poor condition. But I've hand-painted each one silver studs on the holsters. The cowgirl riding a Brahma bull. These are all rodeo cowboys. The one in the back, it's quite fabulous. It's a cowboy on a galloping horse, and he's fending off an Indian brave who's trying to kill him with a hatchet. And the standing figures are mostly famous cowboys: Hopalong Cassidy, Lucky. There's Davy Crockett. On the top shelf of this vitrine are lead replicas of many famous cowboys. This is Gene Autry, the singing cowboy. I believe this is Dale Evans. I think this is Lucky mounted, and Happy, Hopalong Cassidy mounted, and of course the ever recognizable Lone Ranger and Tonto. Moving down, we have larger scale French figurines. Fantastic articulation in the French figures. Another French cowboy on a fully rearing horse, and of course, a nice cowgirl. These are all cowboys sitting around the campfire. Each have a different card hand that they're holding. They're playing poker. Then these are the musicians, all singing Happy Trails, I suppose. The middle shelf is called the Britain's Rodeo Set. It's a complete rodeo inside the corral. Very, very scarce figures that are found nowhere else in Britain's line. Outside are various related figures. More rodeo cowboys. I get a little bit obsessive about things. So we'll just focus a little bit on the last remnants of the militaria. In the cases below, they're all drummer boys. These wooden ones were made in Canada. The full Salvation Army band there. When I sold all my soldiers, I really started to focus on Black Africana. This is a particularly interesting set. The Zulu in full dress, pulling a rickshaw with two white missionary types, mother and child. And I managed to find a postcard of that very same vignette. The elephant hunt with the charging tiger. There are many different sets of Zulus. These are quite fabulous French pieces. This is a witch doctor standing on a very detailed tiger skin. Here's a Tarzan scene. This is a little fantasy set for the Tarzan thing. They're always carrying off some poor hapless creature that Tarzan will have to rescue. On both the lower shelves are interesting river scenes, made all the more interesting by these semi-submerged figures of the hippo rising up out of the water, or the alligator half submerged. Zulu, Zulu, Zulu. This is a scenery piece made in France. This is in the ivory trade, and in the background you can see the boys carrying their ivory boards. Down below, another rickshaw, this one pulled by an ostrich, a great white hunter with a tiger that he's shot, and then more Africans and more Africans and more Africans. To the northern polar regions. I basically tried to collect everything I could find. It was a very wise investment because these are quite scarce and they've gone up in value far more than soldiers. There were so many figurines, all based on Arctic explorers or Inuit life. On the top shelf, we have an igloo, a sled driver, a Norwegian skier made out of composition. A little tiny inkwell housed in an igloo with two Eskimo children. This is the complete Arctic set, all the hunters and drivers, polar bears, sled dogs, and sleigh. These are French Mignot figures, exquisitely painted. These are seal hunters. Those are figures also by Alou, made in France. Indians in canoe sets, quite sought after. This is one of the few pieces in my collection that's contemporary by a current manufacturer. It's also a West Coast canoe. These are the same canoe, but from different periods. One's post-war, one's pre-war. This is a French canoe. I'm not sure who made this, but it's interesting because it has little wheels that you can roll along. I don't know who made this, but it's a beautiful little tubby canoe. This is an American souvenir piece. Here's the fish hawk catching a salmon. And the creme de la creme, which is also a French piece and West Coast. Very hard to find in good condition. We're moving over to a 3-tiered octagon cabinet, which I think has some of the most interesting portions of my collection. On the top is basically a day in the park. This is the donkey ride set, and the sign that says donkey ride is tuppence. This is a picture of my father going on precisely one of those donkey rides. There's schoolgirls and children playing, and mothers with children and picnic baskets, little signs. And this one says no loafing and no cussing, children on teeter-totters. On the next shelf down is a complete Boy Scout campsite. And the bottom shelf is more Eskimo scene, and it has a fantastic scenery piece from France, which is a big ice cave. And in the back, tiny little igloos with just a face coming out the door. They're very cute. One of the things that created me the way I am was that I was an avid Cub Scout. These Boy Scouts were popular in Britain. These are also French Boy Scouts, Italian Boy Scouts. These are considered amongst Britain's finest soldiers. There's a full set of 5 in here, and they are Boy Scout semaphore people. If you know your semaphore, you can spell out any message you want. I used to have these set up so that they said, "fuck you." I'm going to digress for a moment. A couple of examples of box art. So all of these toys originally came in groups of 7. The boxes are worth more than the soldiers inside. Perched above the range, all cowboys and Indians, and of course you can see why the box art is so popular, because if you're a 12-year-old boy in 1960, this is all very current. This is like pre-National Geographic times. This is a very early box. You can see that they were more into the graphics rather than the illustrations. In the lower shelf are 3 of the more valuable toys simply because of their scarcity. Far left is a coal wagon. That's a very scarce set. A collier's wagon. This is probably the scarcest set of all in my collection. And very faintly it'll say Glasgow Southwestern Railroad. But to find that set complete with driver, impossible. But there you have it. Another scarce set, the Roadworks series. They made a whole series of men fixing roads. If you can think about it, they made it. I've fished out a few examples of the hobby of collecting toy soldiers rather than just collecting. A large part of it is modifying them, and I've added the plume and the horse blankets and custom painted it, and I've created this fantasy regiment. This is an interesting piece because I cut the rider off completely, found another figurine, and made this little diorama of a guard leading his horse. This is one of the most complicated ones. It's a drummer, and everything you see is a little individual piece of lead. We used to salvage the lead from the wine bottle tops. We're now in the second gallery of my collection. What you're seeing here is a true testament to obsession. At one point, I was bored with what I was collecting. I thought, oh, I've got a couple of monkeys. By the time I was finished, I had over 100 different lead monkeys, from the tiniest chimp to the biggest gorilla. All along the top are little tiny flats, paper thin, and they're generally only painted on one side. This is a very interesting set. It's called the Chimp's Tea Party. It was first made in 1902 to coincide with this exhibit at the London Zoo, where they did a Chimp's Tea Party every day at 3 o'clock. The chimps on their chairs with their bowls. These are the circus monkeys. I'm now just going to scoot across the room here so that we can take a last look at the remainder of this wall. These are various train sets that I owned as a boy, and All of these pieces here are from a huge collection of Hornby Dublo that my dad had as a boy. He then sold them when my sister was born. He repurchased it all when he discovered he had a son. He then sold it all when I lost interest in the trains, and I had to rebuy it all when I knew I was going to have a son. More monkeys, more French scenery pieces. A very rare lead Tarzan set with Cheetah the monkey. These are three of the largest gorillas ever made in lead by Segal, the same firm that made the fairy tale characters. I waited 20 years until I found the first one. Over the next 5 years I acquired two more, a bit like the Hunt brothers getting a monopoly on silver. This is the organ grinder and his monkey. Below all the monkeys, a rather extensive collection of post office boxes. They're all operational. Put your money in here. This is a real New York mailbox, complete with graffiti. This is the Minnick Royal Mail van, which winds up and actually goes. This one's not even cataloged. I've never seen it in the books. This is a nice little contemporary piece. And it's two very tired mailmen. Go around the corner. There's a lovely photograph by Troy von Tiedemann of me as a young architect. I think I just newly graduated. In the middle is my dad in his sporran. This is my sister and I think I'm 5 here and she's 10, on the grounds near the summer house of Aunt Mary's farm. I started with a very small collection of farm animals where I tried to replicate the happy days that I spent at age 3, 5, 7, and 10 on my uncle's and aunt's farm in Scotland in the summer. I've set this up as a series of rooms, clothes drying on the clothesline, hens and chickens, and on this pond is a mother swan with her little babies. These are the typical hen huts. Lapidary and the rabbits, of course, have all their own little carrots to eat. And being a Scottish farm, there are also hedgehogs. The piggery, piglets. The big pigs, cats, and kittens. The little rat. Here's a piece of luggage with some golf clubs in it that goes in this gentleman's car. The stable set is quite rare and hard to find in good condition. And the cows and cattle, the most motley looking, are actually the most valuable because they're all pre-war. The painting was more airbrushed than just slapped on as in post-war pieces. This is a Suffolk mare and colt, very scarce set. Actual 2-scale size of windmills that are on most farms in Scotland. They just pulling up water from a pond. This is a costermonger with costermonger's baskets. Different greenhouses by Cherylee, Britton's, and Jahilco. A beautiful pond, which completely lithographed tin with the farmer's gig has an elderly farmer with his grandson and granddaughter. Why I like that piece is the story my mother told me of going out in a vehicle just like this with her father. Suddenly stopped and he pointed to this gentleman in another gig and he said to my mother, "Elspeth, do you know who that is? That's J.L. Kraft. He'll be the ruination of the cheese industry." My grandfather and his peers were buying up the quality cheese, and Kraft was going around and buying up all the leftovers and blending it into all manner of cheese whiz. A large part of the collection is devoted to the Royal Engineers. My father was a Royal Engineer and quite the war hero. He gave me a few toys in that area to get me started. All of these Royal Engineers are in costume from the Boer War or Indian Mutiny period. These are Ethiopian sappers. Sappers is another name for Royal Engineers. In the early days before aviation, the engineers were in charge of all ground reconnaissance. In the background you'll see a balloon set here with the balloon and basket and a steam engine specifically designed for the Royal Engineers, a very unusual and difficult piece to find. The gray things are wagons filled with compressed air. In the foreground here you'll see this tripod arrangement with a pulley and block and tackle. The wireless wagon would have the wires wrapped around the coils, and then they would string those out to the telegraph poles. In the background is a beautiful photograph of my dad in his army uniform. A couple of guys that are a bit fagged out and they're sitting down to have a coffee together, tools laid out in front of them, a meeting of the officers around a map table, all the boys having their midday meal. The figure that's mounted is actually King George, who was visiting the troops. My father was presented to King George and George VI for heroism. The gray wagon in the front is an armored officer's carriage. There are 2 or 3 different sets of the Royal Engineers with all their survey equipment. In the background, the gray wagon is the Royal Veterinarian wagon. Pontoon wagons used to create temporary bridges to cross the various rivers. The one in the foreground is the Britain's pontoon wagon set, and that came to me directly from my father. It's probably the largest single collection of Royal Engineers anywhere. I don't think anyone's ever bothered to try and collect 500 Royal Engineers. That part of my collection will be left to the Royal Engineers Museum in England. I got into collecting, I don't know, it must have been from birth. I was an avid stamp collector, coin collector. In grade 6 you have to do the leaf collection, so I collected all the leaves, of course. And then I collected bark samples and spices. I had model trains of every scale, triple O, HO, O. I'm a bit like Sheldon, I guess, on Big Bang Theory. When I'm compulsive, I'm compulsive. I do clean everything, all 2,000 pieces, twice a year. My dad taught me that the way to clean these is just to lick them, because the tongue is the most delicate organ in the body, and it's very useful for getting right between the legs or under the arm. I've been tested for heavy metals, and my lead levels are perfectly normal. The way you get lead poisoning is by chewing on lead, or by ingesting the fumes from the little cans of paint. I can attest that those fumes were something special. Pretty much it's about lead.